Welcome back to the podcast. Today's story is for those who appreciate art and those who fear what lies beneath the surface. This is a first-person account of a man named Julian who accepted a job as an assistant to the world's most reclusive sculptor, Victor Voss.
Victor Voss? The man whose statues look so real they almost seem to breathe? I've seen his work in museums, Ethan. It's ethereal, but it always made me feel cold.
Julian felt that same coldness when he arrived at Voss's mountain estate. The house was made of gray stone, surrounded by jagged cliffs. The air inside was immaculate, but it smelled of bleach and old, dried salt. Voss was a tall, thin man with fingers that looked like white bone. He told Julian, "Art requires a soul. Without a soul, marble is just rock. Remember that." Julian's job was simple: prepare the clay in the basement. But the clay didn't come in bags. It came in large, heavy crates marked perishable. When Julian opened the first crate, he didn't find clay. He found a massive block of a strange pinkish wax that felt like skin.
Pinkish wax. Ethan, that's sinister. Why would a sculptor use something that feels like skin? Did Julian ask him?
He tried, but Voss's eyes were like ice. He told Julian to mind his own business. On the third night, Julian heard a sound from the sanctum, Voss's private studio. It wasn't the sound of a chisel. It was a muffled, wet, thumping sound. Thud, 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 like a heart beating inside a stone wall. Julian crept to the door and looked through the keyhole. The room was filled with statues, dozens of them, men, women, and children, all in positions of extreme agony. Their faces were twisted in silent screams. But Julian noticed something gruesome. Their eyes weren't made of stone. They were real, glossy, wet, and moving.
You're kidding. The statues were alive? Julian saw their eyes moving? That is monstrous.
He was paralyzed with fear. He watched as Voss approached the new statue, a young woman who had gone missing from the village a week ago. She was covered in a thin layer of that pinkish wax. Voss picked up a small silver needle and whispered, "Don't move, my dear. Silence is the highest form of beauty." He pushed the needle into her neck, and Julian watched as her skin began to harden into white marble right before his eyes. Julian tried to run, but the floor felt like it was pulling him down. He realized the basement wasn't just a workshop. The floor was made of the same living clay. He was standing on the faces of 100 people who had been buried alive under the stone.
I need to breathe. My skin feels like it's crawling. Ethan, let's look at those words. You said Voss was reclusive.
Yes, reclusive means someone who lives alone and avoids other people. Voss was a hermit. Then we have ethereal. It means something extremely delicate and light, almost like it's from heaven, but in this story, it's a mask for something hellish.
And you used immaculate.
Immaculate means perfectly clean and neat. The house was too clean, which made it scary. We also had sinister and gruesome. Both describe things that are evil, dark, and disgusting.
Julian is standing on faces, Ethan. Please tell me he gets off that floor.
Julian tried to lift his feet, but the living clay floor was like 1,000 tiny hands pulling him down. The faces beneath his boots began to whisper in a low, subterranean drone. He looked down and saw his boss, Victor Voss, standing in the doorway, holding a bucket of a thick, shimmering white liquid. It looked like melted pearl, but it smelled of salt and chemicals.
He's trapped. He's literally standing on a floor of people, and the monster is standing at the door. Ethan, did Julian try to fight him?
He tried to swing his fist, but Voss moved with predatory speed. He splashed a cup of that white liquid on his legs. The moment it touched his skin, Julian felt a cold, sharp pain, like 1,000 needles made of ice. The liquid didn't stay on the surface. It soaked into his muscles and into his bones and into his bones. Voss whispered, "The calcification is beautiful, Julian. First, your skin becomes translucent. Then your blood turns to sand. Finally, your very soul becomes petrified."
Petrified? You mean he's turning to rock while he's still breathing? That is the most agonizing thing I can imagine. Is he still conscious?
He was more than conscious. His senses became 10 times sharper. He could feel every single molecule of his body turning into calcium. Voss dragged him into the sanctum and strapped him into a high chair made of black marble. Voss picked up a small, jagged tool, a scraper made of obsidian. He began to scrape the outer layer of Julian's skin. He wasn't hurting him, he was shaping him. He was removing the imperfections of a living human. Julian watched as his own blood came out, not red, but a pale, milky white. It didn't drip, it crystallized on the floor like tiny diamonds.
This is atrocious. He's literally being carved like a piece of wood. Liam, why is he still alive? How can a human body survive this?
Because of the living clay, Marcus. The living clay keeps the brain awake while the body dies. Julian looked at the statue next to him, the young woman. Her eyes were still moving, but her lips were white stone. She was screaming in her mind, in never-ending torment. Voss then took a large brush and started painting Julian's chest with a thick, viscous paste. Julian felt his lungs becoming heavy. Every breath felt like he was inhaling wet cement. His heartbeat slowed down. Thump, pause, thump, until it became a metallic clink.
So his heart is turning to stone too? Ethan, stop. This is too harsh. I can almost feel my own chest getting heavy.
Voss looked Julian in the eyes and said, "You will be my masterpiece, Julian, a statue that can still feel the sun but can never escape it. Total, absolute silence." Then Voss picked up a heavy mallet and a chisel. He placed the sharp edge against Julian's jaw. He was ready to fix Julian's expression into a permanent, distorted smile. Julian tried to blink, but his eyelids were already turning marble. He was a prisoner in a cage made of his own body.
Okay, I need a second. That calcification part made me feel physically sick. Let's look at the harsh English Ethan used. You said subterranean.
Yes, subterranean means underground, like the voices under the floor. Then we have calcification. This is a medical and chemical term for when tissue turns into hard, stone-like calcium.
And you called Voss's speed predatory.
Like a predator, an animal that hunts. It means his movements were dangerous and focused. We also used petrified. It has two meanings. In horror, it means extremely scared, but in science, it means turned to stone.
And atrocious and viscous?
Atrocious means something wickedly cruel or very bad. Viscous describes a thick, sticky liquid, like the paste Voss used on Julian's chest.
I'm scared for the last part, Ethan. Does Julian stay a statue forever, or is there a way to break the marble?
Julian was no longer a man. He was an object, a masterpiece. He stood in the center of Victor Voss's private gallery, surrounded by a dozen other statues. He couldn't move his eyes, but he could feel the vibrations of the room. He felt the warm breath of the wealthy people who came to admire him. They touched his cold, white marble skin with their fingers, whispering about how exquisite the detail was.
Exquisite. They have no idea they are touching a living, breathing human being. Ethan, can he hear them? Can he hear Voss?
He could hear everything, Marcus. Sound travels through stone with a strange ringing resonance. He heard Voss laughing, selling the statue of the young woman for $5 million. He felt the cold steel of a chisel one last time as Voss cleaned a small spot on Julian's neck. Julian felt every tiny chip of stone falling off his body like a piece of his own soul being desecrated. But then Julian discovered something. He realized that the living clay wasn't just a prison, it was a network. He began to feel the vibrations of the other statues. They were all screaming, but not with their mouths. They were screaming through the frequency of the stone.
You're kidding. They were saying break, break, break.
They were saying break, break, break. Julian realized that if he could find the right oscillation, the right vibration, he could shatter the marble. He focused all his mental energy into his stone heart. He pushed against the calcified walls of his chest. His heart began to beat, not with blood, but with a lethal intensity. Clang, clang, clang.
Did the marble crack? Did he get out?
The gallery went silent. The guests stopped talking. They heard a high-pitched ringing sound, like a glass about to shatter. Victor Voss stopped laughing. He looked at Julian, his face turning pale. He saw a tiny hairline fracture appear on Julian's marble chest. Voss ran towards him, screaming, "No, you are my masterpiece. Do not..."